Okay, let's dive right into this. Welcome to today's explainer. We're unpacking something that looks incredibly straightforward on the surface, but honestly, it can quickly turn into an operational nightmare if you aren't careful. We're talking about integrating CAPTCHA solving into Budibase workflows. Now, Budibase is fantastic for rapidly spinning up internal tools, admin panels, and automated processes. And adding a CAPTCHA solver during your initial test run, well, it usually feels like a total breeze. But as we're going to see, there is a massive difference between a successful test run and a reliable, bulletproof production system.
Look, we all know the feeling. In your test environment, the happy path. The API call runs, a token comes back, the workflow continues, and everything just looks finished. It's perfect. But then, you take that exact same workflow and deploy it inside a scheduled job, an internal worker pool, or maybe a client automation, and bam, production reality hits. Suddenly, the token is being rejected, your retry logic is just firing over and over again. The workflow interface might even tell you the API call succeeded, but the downstream protected step, it still fails. And the absolute worst part is that your operations team has no idea where the failure actually occurred. It's basically a late-night debugging nightmare.
So, we really need to completely shift our mindset here. You simply cannot look at CAPTCHA solving as just another basic API connector that you drag and drop onto a canvas. The goal isn't just to connect a solving API. The real goal is to engineer a resilient workflow that survives deployment windows, network hiccups, and underlying changes to the CAPTCHA family on the page. It requires genuine production workflow design. To get us there, we're going to run through a highly practical operational checklist. We'll cover 4 main areas. First, authorizing and mapping your workflow. Second, precision inputs in session context. Third, establishing rigid polling limits and hard timeouts. And finally, defining and measuring true workflow success.
Okay, step 1. Authorize and map first. This is all about preventing the standalone mistake.
So our very first step actually happens before you write a single line of integration code or configure any API nodes. The absolute first question you must ask isn't technical at all. It's simply this: is this workflow actually permitted? Because technical functionality means absolutely nothing if the context of your automation is inappropriate. Whether you are dealing with basic automation, bots, or scraping, you absolutely have to establish permission first.
You've got to run through these boundaries right away. Ask yourself, is this your own application or internal tool? Is this a workflow explicitly authorized by your client? Is it part of approved QA, testing, monitoring, or operations? Is the environment covered by a contract or some kind of written permission? Are you respecting third-party terms? A workflow can work flawlessly from a technical standpoint and still be entirely inappropriate if it's used outside these boundaries. So, for the purposes of this explainer, just keep in mind that the architecture we are discussing only applies to owned, client-authorized, or contractually permitted environments.
Right. Once you actually have authorization, you must map the entire chain before adding the solver. Do not start with the API call. Actually, scratch that. Don't even look at the API yet. Start with the full workflow. What triggers the Budibase workflow? Where exactly does the CAPTCHA protected step happen? What data do you need to gather before the solve request? And crucially, where is that solve token going to be applied, and what confirms that the downstream action succeeded? Documenting this prevents the most common design mistake we see, treating the CAPTCHA solve as a standalone task. In reality, the solve is just one piece of a much larger puzzle. Moving on to Part 2, Precision Inputs and Context. We want to avoid the dreaded wrong parameter loop. This is where we get into the technical execution and address the root cause of probably most CAPTCHA workflow failures out there: incorrect or stale inputs. Before you send any data to a solving API, you absolutely must verify the required values against the live HTML page, the network request, or the approved integration source. You need the exact CAPTCHA type, the specific site key, the precise page URL, the action value, and any required proxy or session-related fields. Seriously, do not guess these, and please don't just copy them from an outdated notebook. Verify them live on the page. And here's a foundational kind of one-line fix philosophy you should adopt right now. Send only what the CAPTCHA needs. Resist the urge to send extra data just because it happens to be available in your payload. Dumping unnecessary fields into the API request creates massive confusion and these wild, false debugging paths later when things go wrong. Just keep the request clean, strict, and limited to exactly what the CAPTCHA family expects. Now, this strict data hygiene builds directly into our next major hurdle, session mismatch. This is literally the primary culprit you need to investigate if your token is successfully solved by the API, but then somehow rejected by the downstream server. You see, a solved CAPTCHA token is almost always bound to the exact session or request context that triggered the challenge in the first place. If the challenge happens in one context and your Budibase workflow submits the token from a different browser context, a different HTTP client, or maybe without the original cookies, well, the downstream verification is going to reject it. You have to preserve that same session context for the handoff.
Okay, part 3, polling and hard timeouts. It's time to govern the API call.
So, because CAPTCHA-solving APIs typically rely on a submit and poll mechanism, you need really rigid operational limits to manage this cadence. Otherwise, you're just going to burn right through your account balances. 15. This is your first magic number. Once you submit the task to the solver, you must wait exactly 15 seconds before making your first poll to check the result. Overpolling immediately just adds unnecessary system load, creates a bunch of noise in your logs, and honestly, it won't get you the token any faster. Just take a breath and wait 15 seconds. Next up is 5. After that initial 15-second wait, you should poll the API every 5 seconds. This is the sweet spot. It perfectly balances system responsiveness with efficient load management. Underpolling slows your workflow down unnecessarily, but a solid 5-second interval keeps things moving swiftly as soon as that token is ready.
120. This right here is your hard cap. You absolutely must assert a strict 120-second maximum timeout per task. If the CAPTCHA hasn't resolved in 2 minutes, kill the task. Without this hard timeout, your Budibase workflow risks infinite hanging, which ties up your worker pools and completely stalls out your entire automation pipeline.
And along with those hard timeouts, you've got to govern your retries. Cap your retries at 3 attempts, use exponential backoff, and strictly log any terminal failures. Infinite retries are super dangerous. They hide real structural defects in your workflow, they chew up your API balance for no reason, and they are exactly why silent failures happen in production. Think of it as 3 strikes, log the error, and move on.
Finally, Section 4, defining true workflow success. Let's talk about the metrics that actually matter.
This final phase is all about telemetry, operations, and actually knowing whether your integration is delivering real business value. You have to understand the vast difference between solver success and workflow success. Getting a token received message is not the finish line. A successful API response from your solver doesn't automatically mean your Budibase workflow succeeded. If your solver success is high, meaning, yeah, the API is giving you tokens, but your workflow success is low, you don't have a solver problem. You likely have a session mismatch, a token placement error, an expired state, or maybe missing form data. You have to track these as 2 entirely separate outcomes. Because look, if you can't measure it, you can't defend it. You need to wire these exact KPIs into your operational dashboard. Watch your first solve latency, target under 25 seconds for tokens. If you're hitting that, your integration is healthy and it's not getting bogged down waiting on retries. Monitor your solver success rate, target 95% or higher. This proves your inputs correctly match the live challenge. And most importantly, track that end-to-end acceptance. Again, target 95% or higher post-token. If that number is solid, it means your downstream verification actually accepts the token and your session is applied correctly. Tracking these metrics lets you spot regressions long before a user or a client ever notices something is broken.
And hey, when things do inevitably go wrong, having a structured approach makes maintenance practically effortless. This quick troubleshooting rundown covers roughly 90% of the support tickets teams usually see. Getting an error 0 balance? Just top up and add a balance alert. Seeing error bad parameters? Go revalidate your URL and site key directly against the live HTML, not from memory. And if the token is rejected after a successful solve, it's almost always a session mismatch. So ensure you are applying the token in the exact same HTTP session context that triggered the challenge in the first place.
Which leaves us with this final critical question to ask yourself the next time you test a Budibase integration. Your solver returned a token, but did your business process actually complete? Merely firing an API connector is easy, but successfully designing a resilient, production-grade workflow that actually drives your operations forward, well, that requires structure, context, and a bit of discipline. Take this checklist, apply it to your next build, and watch your production stability soar. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and happy building!